When it comes to Costa Mesa politics, there are few people more dedicated than former councilman and current city council candidate Jay Humphrey. Jay has constantly been on the front lines and involved with most of the important issues relating to the expansion and development in Costa Mesa. He has been a leader in a number of organizations that have attempted to slow growth and most recently created a controversial and questionable ballot measure being put to the voters this November. We wanted to talk to him about that, his recent loss in a lost election by only 47 votes, and what makes him so dedicated, so focused, so intent on defeating the current council. What we found is a strong personality that will engage in a conversation with straight talk, charm, and wit. Now, I noticed you have a Hawaiian shirt behind you.
Yes, I do.
Is there a significance to why you brought it with you today?
Well, actually, it's because, let's face it, everybody knows me as somebody in a Hawaiian shirt. People need to understand that I understand that there's an appropriate dress in the appropriate venue and what have you. So that's quite why I have my Hawaiian shirt back there behind me, but I'm dressed this way because in respect to you and your questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, you moved to Costa Mesa in 1978, is that correct?
Correct.
And what drew you here?
Well, the same thing everything drags. I grew up in Glendale, California. I spent an awful lot of my life in California, in Southern California in particular. We had gone to the Midwest and then to Chicago ultimately. The job opportunity brought me back out here, and I came willingly and settled in Orange County.
Nice. And now you ran for city council in the first time in 1988?
In 1988.
And then you were elected again, you ran again in...
It was actually 87, but you served from 88.
Okay.
So, no, it is 88. I'm sorry, it is 88.
And then you ran again in 1990, and that's when you were elected?
Exactly.
And you served until 1994?
Right.
Okay. What were some of your accomplishments with the city council?
Well, there's a lot of little things that just happen day to day. The most important one I think that happened was that I was instrumental in getting the city out of the county investment fund before the county went bankrupt.
And that's when they were $1 million in debt?
Well, everybody went, the city didn't go $1 million in debt.
Sorry, the city was $1 million in debt.
Actually, they weren't $1 million in debt at that time. This was the county investment fund. And
Okay.
had we stayed in the investment fund for any period of time, we would have found ourselves at about a 40% loss for our investment, which has severely restricted our ability to actually perform the services we should have. A lot of funding for background things and what have you would have been problematic.
So I thought the city was $1 million in debt in 1992. Is that not?
Well, it was in debt, and for that reason, one of the reasons is that I was involved in changing the city council pay and reducing it so we wouldn't have to reduce officers on the street. The object is the very first responsibility of a council person is the safety of the community throughout. So making sure we keep an adequate police force that can address the issues of the city and actually take care of the varying tasks that happen is an important process for us.
Now, you've served on a lot of activist groups in Costa Mesa.
I don't know it's a lot, but I've served on activist groups.
Let's see. Let me see. I might be wrong on some of these. This is just what I was able to connect you to through the internet.
Okay.
So if you could correct me if I'm wrong. Costa Mesa Concerned Citizens for Responsible Government. Costa Mesa for Responsible Growth. Costa Mesa for Responsible Government.
Well, the first one and this one is the same thing, so yes.
Okay. Okay, and Citizens for Costa Mesa's Future?
No.
Okay. And then Costa Mesa First?
Yes.
Okay, are any of these groups still active?
Costa Mesa First, Costa Mesa, Costa Mesans for Responsible Government, and the one you failed to note is the Fairview Park Preservation Alliance, which is also one of the other organizations I belong to.
Okay, and why, so let's see, so why did some of these groups disband?
Well, some of them disband because, as you know, over time, a number of organizations have either accomplished their goals or they have just over time, other things have changed and the direction they've taken has not worked well. So the organization kind of settles down and decides they're not going to be active anymore. Some of them have actually gotten stronger over time because more and more things have happened to lead to that problem.
Okay. And how were these groups, what were their goals? Like, how were their goals similar?
Well, all their goals are to bring balance and keep a responsible government, a government that looks to the people of the community, a government that looks to making sure the community is as healthy as it possibly can be, and came into being because of things that were happening that didn't seem to be in that direction.
Okay. And how were they different?
They might have had different directions they're taking.
Okay.
All right. I mean,
I know that question's
Fairview
kind of
Park
the same as the other one, sort of, so sorry.
Yeah, Fairview Park Preservation Alliance is focused at Fairview Park. Costa Mesa for Responsible Government is focused at the government. Costa Mesa First is focused at development issues in the city.
Okay.
So different focuses, but all in the same general area.
So can you tell me about Costa Mesa First initiative?
Sure. What would you like to know?
But what brought it on?
Well, actually, it's a response that happens when, in fact, the public goes to a variety of meetings and voices their concerns about the changes in the community's development process. And as they move forward, they find that their voice is not being heard. The community is almost all built out. There's about a 1% vacant land, and that 1% is already entitled somehow. So it's Foam Ranch is a perfect example. There's the only very little vacant land involved. But we're now doing things that have impacts on the community that may not be mitigatable. We have already established and built streets to certain sizes because we're already built out. So if you impose much greater densities on the exact same areas, maybe the housing or the business or whatever it is that goes in that spot is a beautiful new thing, but the traffic generated from it may in fact become so additive to the congestion that we reach a point where the congestion becomes unmanageable.
Okay, so the real issue is the traffic?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so the initiative is because voices weren't being heard and there's too much traffic?
I would think not. There was too much traffic.
Or there
is
will
a lot
be.
of traffic.
Okay.
But if you continue to add more high density development onto already existing land, you wind up by seeing problems with excess traffic, excess use of subterranean infrastructure like sewer, water, and what have you. We're in a drought right now, and we're putting, what's been approved right now, up to now has been over 2,000 units, so that's 2,000 more people using water, using sewage, and what have you.
Wouldn't those 2,000 people be using the water and sewage in California anyway?
Maybe not. They might be coming from out of town. After all, if we make the whole thing set up in such a way that we're drawing people to Costa Mesa, probably a portion of those people being drawn from other parts of the country to Costa Mesa as opposed to just in lower Southern California.
So I looked into some of these new developments and I saw one condo sold for $900,000. And our schools get funded through property tax. We're very lucky in Costa Mesa that we're not reliant on the state to fund our schools. It's through the property taxes of the surrounding homes.
Okay, all right.
So wouldn't not developing more houses, wouldn't that be taking funds from our schools?
Well, it depends how you look at it. It depends on whether the total infrastructure we have to deal with the new housing and the densities we impose in that new housing, we use in that new housing, that creates other costs that the city has to bear above and beyond. And the city doesn't actually make a judgment call about the schools. We don't have any control of the schools. That's done by the school board as it should be. However, if you have the part of the tax that we get is, for the city, is only 1%. And I think it is somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% for the schools. So sure, if in fact a property doesn't immediately jump from some price to another price on the sale of that property, if in fact the owner of a property who had already gotten the property valuation or Prop 30 maintains ownership of that property, then the only differential is going to be on the amenity on that property, not the property itself. So it's a different way of looking at it, and sure, we might see some fewer dollars that are possible by redeveloping, but by that argument, then what we should do is we sell every piece of property in the city every year, so we maximize out the property values no matter what. And that would probably thwart the idea behind Prop 30, and I'm not sure anybody wants to do that.
Okay, thank you. Now,
Prop 13, I'm sorry, I didn't mean
no,
Prop 30.
it's-
Prop 13.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my mistake.
Okay. Now, one issue in Costa Mesa that everyone is passionate about is the sober living homes.
Absolutely.
Do you have a plan to address those?
Do I have a
plan to address sober living homes?
Well, as you may know, is when they started this whole process, I've been very vocal about taking control wherever possible, and I do understand the limitations for ADA and for all the disabled factors involved. Pardon me. I was one of the people that has actively spoken up about this issue, and so far they did the first iteration of their law was okay to start. When they did the R2, it was basically the R1, the single family housing R1 to multifamily housing R2. The R2 iteration was in essence the same thing as the R1 with an escalation. Now you could have 7 people up to as many as you wanted, as long as you had a conditional use permit.
Are you saying that we rezoned single-family homes to multifamily, or?
No, I'm
Okay.
saying that they have 2 ordinances. One
Okay.
ordinance covers single-family
Sorry, I was
homes,
confused with the R1, R2.
and one covers R2 homes.
Okay.
And the truth of the matter is that I was the person that told the council that a number of these people that go to these homes that need to be treated, when they fail for whatever reason, they either don't pay their fee or they fail to stay sober, are kicked out of the house. Now what happens in those places is those people are not sent back to where they came from, and many of them come from out of state and other communities all over the place. The reason for that is a pretty sensible one. You don't want people trying to rehabilitate themselves and get out of that environment that is keeping them from being sober. So you try and put them in places where they don't have the people around them that were around them before. So it makes perfect sense to send those folks from, say, New York City out here. Well, if when somebody fails, who you've been making a lot of money on, somebody fails like that and then you don't send them back to where you recruited them from, that's just taking advantage of the community. So I asked the council to add into the new law, which they did, by the way, to when somebody is failing or fails at a sober living home, they must be returned to the community of origin by the organization's cost. The only thing they've complained about so far is that part of the ordinance, because that's the part that they don't want to have to deal with. They don't want to have to deal with sending those people and using part of their profits
They
to get
being
them back.
the sober living homes?
management
Okay.
companies. Yeah. And I understand that. I don't agree with it, but I do understand why somebody wouldn't want to give it their profit. The number of sober living homes we have in this community is staggering. And when you start to look around other communities, that it's interesting to note that finally there is a petition going on down in San Juan Capistrano that is actually trying to address the whole idea of having state regulation on this matter that is substantial and complete. And I understand that, and I'm glad to see it happen. I hope that plus our ordinances that now tend to restrict and control are put into place. One of the things that I'm very concerned about is I brought up a sober living facility over on Royal Palm, and at that sober living home they start off with 1 apartment. I don't know if they've had anything else going on with the city at this point, but I do know that more and more of the units, and there's 8 total in those 2 buildings side by side on the same piece of property, are becoming housed with sober living folks. That could be a total of about 48 folks. And what you've done now is you've just done exactly what you're not supposed to do. That's institutionalized these folks. One of the reasons they come to a home in a neighborhood is to deinstitutionalize them. And now what you're doing is you're putting 48 into one facility. That's institutionalizing by any stretch of the imagination. And so consequently, the city, in my estimation, should be talking to them every day. When that happens, I'll be very happy.
So if you're sitting on the city council, how do you plan on making that happen?
I will be doing everything I can. Obviously, we have federal laws we have to deal with, and we have state laws we have to deal with. But allowing for those things, the one thing to not do is say there is no solution. There's always a solution if you can use your brain, you can talk to a lot of people, you can talk to people who know the problem, and you can find a solution to that process. So I'll be doing that actively.
Now, the current city council is very divided. How do you plan on uniting them as a front? How do you plan on being able to work with everyone?
Well, I think I've made it pretty clear, and if you've watched me at city council meetings, you've noted that I don't try to be divisive. I don't try to call people names. I don't try to denigrate people or make them less than what they are. I talk about what they do and what is public record and what is understood. And I believed a long time ago that you lead by example, not by what you say, but what the example you set. I've always been able to work with very divergent groups and organizations, and consequently I have no doubt that I'll be able to bring a sense of congeniality, of collegiality, if you will, to the group.
Well, speaking of leading by example, at the February 2nd City Council meeting, you chose to turn your back on the council members instead of speaking.
I did.
What was the meaning of this?
It wasn't obvious. It wasn't obvious?
Maybe not to everyone.
Wow, I thought it was pretty obvious.
With that, I'm planning to spend the rest of my time doing the most effective thing I can do in talking to this council.
I thought it was pretty obvious. I got up, the council had continuously demonstrated they weren't listening to people, and I said, enough is enough. You know, if you're not going to listen to people, I'll just use my time to share with you any kind of comments that count. And I turned my back on them. So they would understand clearly that I've only asked them to be cordial, to be able to listen to what is said, and to actually include that stuff in the decision process. And part of this council's decided not to do that. And that's fine. That's their choice and their political choice. But the same shot is for me. If they're not going to listen to me, I do have the right to be there. And I decided to use my time as wise I could.
And do you think these actions show your potential voters that you will be able to work with the already divided council?
Well, you know what? You're right that it might show that I reach a point where I say, you know, enough is enough. I'm not afraid to speak my mind about what enough is enough. And I'm certainly not afraid to say to somebody on the dais, amongst my colleagues, that don't you think your behavior needs to be looked at by yourself to decide whether or not you are being a responsible, sharing individual for the council.
Now, is there anything you'd like to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
Not yet. I'm sure you have more questions, so. Well, that's good. So, actually, I do have a couple of things then, because you have no more questions. One of the things that I've been very concerned about in the community is that this council has not seemed to find any way until finally, in negotiation with the PD, they took a step towards helping to reduce the unfunded liability. And that was a combination of two things. The council being willing to work with the PD's association, and two, the PD being willing to take on more of their responsibility toward their percentage of their retirement funding. That's one of the steps that was recommended by the retirement fund committee for the council, and the council at that time seemed to not be willing to talk about that. Finally, it has happened, and I think it's a great step. So I look forward to more of those kind of things to help take care of our unfunded liability. Part of it's already gone away because of the change in the economic status of our community, and I'm very pleased that that's happened. I understand fully, because of the way it's designed, that we have another major financial downturn, we're going to have more problems. But the only way you compensate, the only way you deal with those is making sure as you take steps forward that you ultimately wind up by having a good set of contracts that are sustainable, and that you can continue to keep your police department and your fire department effective without leaving that undone because you financially strip yourself out by putting benefits that are beyond what you can sustain.
Well, I know you were serving on the Fairview Park Alliance. Is that the
Fairview Park Preservation Alliance.
Fairview Park Preservation Alliance?
Yeah, I'm a member of that group.
Okay, and what are your goals with that?
Well, the goals are basically to preserve Fairview Park, keep it as open and natural as possible. We have a jewel that I'm amazed at how people think. It's the only piece of parkland in this area that is even close to that. We have both a part of it that has been, if you will, urbanized, i.e. the grassed area where we have the fish fry, and that has stayed wild and natural, as where we have the vernal pools, and we have a variety of different habitats for California gnatcatcher, the burrowing owl, as part of the process. And it's a place where people can go and actually explore without being told what to do, without having a preset plan of what you're going to do. It is connected to the ocean by way of Talbert Park on down through Banning Ranch on down to the ocean, and it's part of the estuary of the Santa Ana River. The other rivers that have gone out to the ocean in this county have all been built on, like Laguna Beach, as an example. They built right, so the outflow of that canyon, which would have been a river at one time probably, the outflow of that canyon is now covered with houses and roads and everything else. Well, we have a unique jewel here, and it's a resource for the community to look forward to for the far, far future. And if we're not willing to do that, we need to think about that. And I believe that the decisions about making significant changes in that park should be in the hands of the public specifically, because it's we, the public, all own that park. It's owned through the city. I don't mean to misstate that, but we're the city. And that's one of the few things that I think should always be in the hands of the public.
Now, Prop 47 was passed by voters, and it has caused an increase in crime. Mm-hmm. What makes you think voters will make the right decision when it comes to property development or Fairview Park preservation?
Well, first off, when you look at Prop 47, the truth of the matter is that many people were not directly impacted by that particularly. So their choices were based on a lot of different factors. On property rights specifically, because in reality, the Smart Growth Initiative does not affect people's property rights. They're already defined in the general plan. Only when you change the property rights, you say, geez, give me more property rights. Well, if you're asked for more, then people can usually look at the circumstance, and they will be given adequate information to be able to make the choices, and they should be easily done. As far as the park is concerned, people use the park. People see what the value is. People actually can experience it firsthand. Not too many people experience being in jail. Very few people do. But you can experience the park firsthand. You can experience the traffic generated by excess development in an already built out amenity where the streets cannot be widened, or if they are, you're going to start taking people's property away from them. Another interference with property rights, so that I give one person property rights so that in fact I can take away property rights from somebody else. Not a good idea. And I think people will understand that. I think when it affects them directly, they specifically understand that.
How many, do we know what percentage of Costa Mesa goes out to vote every election cycle?
Well, we have just shy of 50,000. We probably have a little over 50,000 because as we get close to the election, more people register. Mm-hmm. And of course, I've been guilty of registering a whole number of people over the last few months. So we slowly but surely build that number up. We have about 50,000 out of the 115,000. And of that 50,000, depending on the election, depending where it is, we go everywhere from 30% to 60%. So it's all over the place as far as happens. And that's why it's called a democracy, because the people who vote.
We could be leaving all of Costa Mesa's future up to just 30% of...
No different than leaving up to 3 people.
Would you like to tell Costa Mesa residents why they should vote for you?
Yeah, a number of reasons. First, I've been a long-term resident of Costa Mesa who has watched the changes, watched the dynamics of the city, and understand the problems that we face here in Costa Mesa. I can make decisions easily and clearly, and I'm not afraid to pick the decision that I believe is the best from gathering all the data I need from the multiple people that I need to listen to, as well as the community itself. The biggest mistake any council person makes, in my estimation, is not listening to the community. There's way too many smart people out here for me to ignore them, and I don't plan to. I bring a sense of balance back to the council so that what happens is we find ways to make votes that are beneficial for Costa Mesa, as opposed to any group that cares to be a part of it. My process is Costa Mesa is always first, and the community, the citizens of Costa Mesa, and that includes the businesses that are part of Costa Mesa citizenry, are all coming first.
Now, in 2014, you ran against James Righeimer,
Yes, I
and
did.
you lost by only 47 votes.
Yep.
How do you feel losing by such a small margin?
I hated it, but it's what the vote was. And after looking at it and talking to a lot of people, I made a decision not to have a recount because it probably wouldn't change the outcome in that setting. It just told me that I had to work harder. I had to get out there and do more things. I've had the wonderful experience of having some of the greatest supporters and some of the greatest volunteers in the world that have worked their hearts out for me. And they were very disappointed, and I was very disappointed for them, much more so than for me, because the amount of effort they put into it makes mine look like a shadow. But the truth of the matter is that it all it means I just work harder this time, and we'll have a different outcome. Obviously, if I wasn't sure of that, I wouldn't be here.
So have you made any changes in your campaign in the last 2 years that you think will get you ahead?
Yeah, but I'm going to share those when it comes time.
Okay.
Yeah.